Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, looking back at this year so far, right? We're 79 games in. What is so different about the Timberwolves, specifically on the offensive end of the floor versus last year? Why has the offense struggled so much? And it's very topical after the last few games. Now a 3-game losing streak at a critical time in the season for the Wolves. Plus a look at the standings, the play-in possibilities for the Wolves, and a preview of Wolves Nets on Tuesday night. It's all coming on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase of last-minute tickets. Lowest price guaranteed. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Happy Timberwolves game day. It is the only game that the Wolves have Monday through Friday this week. And with every single game, we keep saying this is the biggest game of the season so far. That's where we're at. The Wolves have some work to do over their final three. They really have to win all three. This is the toughest one of the three, I guess. But then again, what's toughest on paper hasn't always been toughest in practice for the Wolves this year. We'll talk about that here in a minute. First of all, though, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. More great local sports coverage 24/7 for free. This show, plus all the other Locked On Minnesota podcasts, download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app today. Again, that's on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at my account, which is at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. All right, I do want to talk standings, play-in possibilities. We'll do that here in a minute. But I want to start with taking like a half step back, looking at the totality of the season, 79 games in, and the Wolves defensively have been essentially the same team as they were last year in terms of results. Certainly they've gone about it in a bit of a different way, trading out, I guess wrecking ball nature of Jared Vanderbilt, among others, for the more steady, solid interior defense of Rudy Gobert, and the scheme has changed, and they've done a lot of different things, but the results are by and large the same, right? So currently right now, according to Basketball Reference, the Wolves are 10th in defensive rating. Last year, they finished 13th in defensive rating. They're turning teams over, not quite the same rate that they were last year. The rebounding's been marginally better, especially of late, but the turnovers, forcing turnovers have been not quite as good. Like, similar results. They still foul a lot, just like they did last year. So even if the actual function, or the way that the defense does function, I should say, has changed, the results are very similar. The offense, however, is not the same as it was last year. The results have not been the same. Last season, the Timberwolves offense finished 8th in offensive rating league-wide. It featured, obviously, Karl-Anthony Towns having a fantastic year, 25 and 10. Nearly 4 assists per game. You had Anthony Edwards a massive improvement from his rookie year to his sophomore year in the NBA, scoring 21 a game and shooting 36% for three, Cat shooting 41% for three. You had D'Lo doing his thing. You had Malik Beasley off the bench, who of course had a bit of a rocky season, but in general, the totality of the Wolves offense last year was very successful. And certainly the second half of the year, much more than the first half of the year, right? I mean, like Torian Prince is maybe the best example, where he was shooting like 20-some%, basically 20% through December, like the worst shooting year of his career. And then he shot, like, I'm exaggerating a little, but like 50% the rest of the season. Jordan McLaughlin had 30-some straight games without a turnover, or no, I'm sorry. It was like 30-something assists to 1 turnover the course of like 6 weeks, January, February, March. There was so much about the second half of last season that gave us hope for this year. And then, of course, all the roster changes. Out is Malik Beasley. Out is Jared Vanderbilt. Out is Patrick Beverly. In is, out is Josh Okogie, of course, more of an impact defensively last year. And then you bring in, guys like Kyle Anderson, and you retain Torian Prince, and you expect the offense to be every bit as good this year, if not better, once Rudy Gobert finds his footing. Well, of course, that never happened. Still hasn't really, at least not with Karl-Anthony Towns on the floor at the same time. And now an offense that was 8th in offensive rating last season, sitting here now 79 games through the regular season with 3 to play, is 24th in the league. Last year, the Wolves won 46 games. This year, the best case for the Wolves is 42 wins and very possibly could finish at or below 500 this season. Again, the defense, 8th last year, 10th this year. Or excuse me, 13th last year, 10th this year. The offense, 8th last year, 24th this year. Let's take just a slight deeper dive on this at the overarching numbers. And to be clear, I mean, D'Angelo Russell was a big part of this team early in the season, right? He's no longer on the squad. I get that. So, like, there was some shifting in the middle of the season. D'Lo played in 54 of the 79 games. Conley's now played in 21 games with the Wolves. Of course, the biggest difference is no Karl-Anthony Towns for the majority of the season. He's only played in 26 games to this point and is averaging career lows in points, in rebounds, 3-point shooting. Like, these are numbers that are abnormal for Cat, especially in terms of games played. That's the biggest difference. And I get that. But that's not what I'm evaluating. I'm evaluating where the Timberwolves are right now, regardless of who's on the floor. Like, if we look up and say, oh man, the Wolves are a game below 500, they're back in 9th in the West, and there's actually a relatively small, but a relatively small chance, but still a chance that they miss the playoffs and the play-in entirely this season. So why is that? Well, last season, the Timberwolves were 3rd in 3-point rate in the entire NBA. They were actually 1st in attempts per game, but because they played at such a high pace, they were 3rd in 3-point rate. Where are they this season? They're 14th. And they were much lower early in the season. That has picked up as the season's gone on. They're 14th in 3-point rate, so middle of the pack. This is a team, and granted, there's, you're not looking at 1 through 12 guys that can knock down threes consistently, but you're still talking, when Cat's on the floor, one of the best shooters in the league. D'Lo is 39% in a Wolves uniform. Jaden McDaniels is still 39%. Mike Conley in a Wolves uniform is 41%. So your starting point guard all season has been about 40% from 3. Anthony Edwards shoots high volume threes. Why isn't the overall 3-point rate higher? And that's an issue. Now, the percentage is 16th in the league, 36%. You can handle that. The volume needs to be higher. That's number one. Number two, turnover rate. And actually, this is out of order. And I don't mean number one in terms of the most important. This second one that I'm going to mention is actually the biggest issue, and that's turnover rate. They are 28th right now going into Tuesday night's game against Brooklyn in turnover rate this season. Last season, this Timberwolves team was 14th in turnover rate. The turnover rate currently is 13.7%. That means almost 14% of the time that the Wolves have a possession, they're turning it over. Last year, that number was 12.4%. It may not sound like a huge difference, but that's a couple of possessions a game. A couple additional turnovers per game. If you want to look at turnovers per game, we could do it that way too. I think rate is a better way to look at it. But the Wolves last year were 21st in turnovers per game, 14.3 turnovers per game. This season, turnovers per game, 15.5 turnovers per game. That's 28th in the league. So a turnover and a half more per game. And when you're shooting less threes and you're turning it over, call it 1.5 times more per game, those things add up to a very bad turn for your offense. You shoot less threes, you turn it over more. Number three, the offensive rebound rate. The Timberwolves last year, believe it or not, were actually 7th in offensive rebound rate. I've talked a lot about how bad they are as a defensive rebounding team, and they have been for years. That's continued this year. They were bad last year on the defensive glass, although here the last few weeks they've improved a little, but maybe not so coincidentally after acquiring Mike Conley. The attitude, the mentality on the defensive glass has changed for the better for the Wolves. But offensive rebounding wise, this year the Wolves are 27th in offensive rebound rate. Last season, they were 7th in offensive rebound rate. 7th. That's easy to forget. That's not one of those things that we talk about a whole lot. But you lose Jared Vanderbilt. Jared Vanderbilt had a 12% offensive rebound rate last season. Karl-Anthony Towns was over 8%. Nobody else in the top 7 last season is on the team and playing rotation minutes in terms of offensive rebound rate. You had Nate Knight, who doesn't play, Vando, who's gone, Naz Reid, who I guess 8.8%, he's now hurt, and did more defensive glass-wise this year than offensively. Greg Monroe barely played last year. Leandro Bolmaro didn't play much, not on the team. Josh Kogi, not on the team. That was your top 7 in offensive rebounding rate last year. And again, Vando at 12%, Nas and Cat each over 8%. This season, in terms of individual offensive rebound rates, the Timberwolves are led by, here, I lost my number here. Where'd it go? Individual offensive rebound rate, the Timberwolves this year are led by Rudy Gobert, 12.4%. So the same neighborhood as Vando, actually slightly higher. Nobody else that plays rotation minutes is over 8%. Garza is 15%, but he's only played in 27 games. Nate Knight has played in 36 games, 8.4%. Naz Reid is down at 6.7%, so almost 2 points lower than last year, and he's hurt now. Cat's at 6%, hasn't played much. McDaniel's actually the same rate he was last year, 4.4%. But you haven't, I mean, the Vando production's replaced by Rudy Gobert, but nobody else is in that same, I guess, tier of offensive rebounding. So your team offensive rebound rate plummets from 7th in the league to 27th in the league. And then the last thing, which is the least extreme here, but last year the Wolves were 10th in free throw rate and actually much higher for much of the season, but they settled at 10th in free throw rate last season. This year they're 13th. So they're also getting to the line less often. And that's another one that's impacted a lot by Karl-Anthony Towns. So certainly no Cat impacts your 3-point rate. It impacts your offensive rebound rate. It impacts your free throw rate. So those you can draw a direct line to Karl-Anthony Towns' impact and him not being on the floor, that mattering, which, by the way, is another thing. If anybody, to build a quick straw man here, if anybody out there is blaming Cat for any of this, and certainly he wasn't good. He attempted 3 shots in Sunday's matinee loss to Portland. But Cat buoys all those categories, right? You need Cat to improve your 3-point rate, your offensive rate, your free throw rate. The turnover rate thing is inexcusable, mostly inexplicable. It's just pure sloppiness, and it's across the board. Like, we've even seen Jordan McLaughlin lately struggle with turnovers. We've seen a lot of issues, even from Kyle Anderson, Taurean Prince, vets. Taurean Prince had some bad ones this year. D'Lo earlier this season. Cat when he's been on the floor. Gobert with the offensive fouls. The turnovers are the biggest thing, number one. And then the Cat absence kind of feeds into the 3-point rate, the offensive rebound rate, and the free throw rate. Those are the biggest issues this year. And that is how you have a top 10 offense, 8th in the league last season, plummet all the way to number 24 through 79 games this season. Okay, I do want to take a peek at the standings, kind of a snapshot, the play-in scenarios. ESPN had a nice article that kind of broke down the most likely scenarios. So I want to touch on that before we get to the Wolves-Nets preview. So we're going to do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our new friends over at Game Time. Buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. I certainly have experienced, we'll call it stress related to procrastination. If I want to go to an event, concert, stand-up comedy, or, a sporting event, a lot of times I kind of wait until I maybe shouldn't wait anymore. I'm looking at the venue site. I'm looking at their ticketing partner, third-party sites, looking for tickets. And I often fail because I've waited too long. But again, buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. The Game Time app has flash deals and last-minute tickets, easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event. They have images of seat views, lowest price guarantees, etc. Game Time is the place for last-minute ticket deals. It's perfect for people like me that procrastinate when buying tickets. Forget planning months in advance. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. Get exclusive flash deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. You can get images of your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. You can buy your tickets in a matter of seconds, 2 taps, and you're set. The tickets are sent directly to your phone, so you never have to dig through your email. Snag your tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, so there's plenty of play-in possibilities still and playoff scenarios in the Western Conference coming into play on Tuesday. Or actually, this is coming into play. I'm recording this before games on Monday, but actually I say that there aren't any games scheduled for Monday. So coming into play on Tuesday, the Timberwolves are 9th in the West. They're a game up on Oklahoma City for 10th. They're a game and a half behind the Pelicans for 8th, and also the Lakers, who are in 7th. The Wolves do have the tiebreaker over the Lakers, so getting to 7th is feasible. If the Lakers stumble, Lakers still have 4 games left. The Wolves only have 3. So say the Lakers go 2-2 and the Wolves win out, the Wolves would get past the Lakers in the Western Conference because they do have that tiebreaker. That's feasible, right? The Wolves could do that. I mean, looking at the Lakers schedule, it's favorable. They're at Utah, who technically still has a chance. Then they're at the Clippers, it's not favorable, actually. I'm misremembering. They have 2 games against Utah, although the last game Utah may not care anymore. They're at the Clippers and they're home for Phoenix, both of whom have some incentive to play well. I mean, the Suns are trying to hang on to the 4 spot. The Clippers are trying to hang on to the 5 spot and potentially get to 4. So it's actually a tough close for the Lakers. Them going 2-2 is not crazy, even though they've been playing a lot better of late. But if they go 2-2 and the Wolves win out, you're looking at potentially the 7 spot for the Wolves. In that scenario, Minnesota would also jump the Pelicans, who are a game and a half ahead of them, but they'd win the tiebreaker and beat the Pelicans head-to-head on Sunday. If the Wolves win out, the Lakers go 2-2. That's a scenario where the Wolves could get to 7. And depending on how Golden State and the Clippers fare, there's a chance they could get up to 6, likely not 5, but it's possible, right? Like, winning out, 5, 6, 7 are all still on the table for Minnesota. Anything short of that, and you're looking at a very likely 8, 9, 10 scenario, and probably 9 or 10, even if the Wolves go 1-2 the rest of the way. So ESPN has this article about playoff scenarios. Let's see here. Here we go. The play-in race, making sense of the final week, the seeding push. So the most likely play-in scenario is still just shy of 10%. It's like 8.5% are the odds, according to the ESPN Basketball Power Index projections. The most likely scenario is Minnesota landing 9th and the Thunder staying in 10th. The Pelicans and Lakers finishing in 7 and 8, which is, of course, where everybody is right now. So perhaps that's why it's the most likely scenario. But I mean, like, the Wolves would at least host the game, but you have to beat the Thunder at home. And then you have to go on the road to play the loser of the Lakers Pelicans game, right? So if the Wolves beat the Thunder at home, then you go on the road to play the loser of Lakers Pelicans. That would not be fun. That at this moment is the most likely scenario. I will also say ESPN has the Wolves with the highest odds to be in the play-in, which is both good and bad. It's good in that they have a very slim chance of falling out, according to ESPN's BPI, but also a slim chance of climbing up out of the play-in. The Wolves, for context, they have a 96.6% chance of finishing between 7th and 10th. Nobody else is higher than 68%. The Pelicans have a 68.5% chance. OKC 61%. The Lakers are 51% to be in the play-in. The Clippers and Warriors are each under 50% because they're likely to stay up at 5 or 6. Dallas only has a 36.6% chance of climbing back up into the play-in. They've been a disaster lately. Utah's down at 3.1%. So the Wolves are very likely to finish between 7 and 10. According to ESPN, almost 97% likely. So the most likely scenario is Wolves Thunder. There's also a 3% chance of a Wolves-Mavs matchup, which would be interesting, to say the least, and actually not a bad matchup for Minnesota. And of course, now if the Mavs make the playoffs, it means they've turned something around over the last week of the season. But it's still not a bad matchup for Minnesota. We've covered why here on the show, but in short, the Wolves can guard isolation offense really well with Anthony Edwards, Jade McDaniels, Taurean Prince, Kyle Anderson, etc. The Mavericks do not have good perimeter defense, and Ant can just score all day long against the Mavs. So I would welcome that matchup. A less than 1% chance has the Wolves taking on the Jazz in the play-in, which would be, of course, the storyline there is Rudy versus Utah, and Utah backing their way into the playoffs despite, really kind of trying not to. There's also a scenario, which this is fascinating, a potential 6-way logjam scenario. They have this at 0.000009%. So the ultimate long shot, according to ESPN. But it's possible for the Clippers, Warriors, Lakers, Pelicans, Timberwolves, and Thunder to all finish 41-41. So the Wolves would have to go 2-1 the rest of the way. And then the tiebreakers come down to winning percentage among the tied teams, division leader wins, division win percentage, conference win percentage against conference teams eligible for the playoffs, and then point differential. Point differential, the Wolves are not in a good place there. The Wolves actually have the worst point differential of any team currently in the playoff race. In fact, still worse than Dallas. So that would not be good for the Wolves. However, in this scenario, if the Wolves beat the Pelicans on Sunday and finish at 41-41, they would be 11-6 against the other 5 teams and secure the number 5 seed. So this is actually a scenario you could root for as a Wolves fan, is a 5-way tie based on their 11-6 record. And this goes exactly along with what we've talked all season. The Wolves play to their competition. The Wolves have a good record against everybody. That's good. They have a bad record against many bad teams. The Wolves have basically played everybody to, I think the Blazers are the only team the Wolves are going to either not draw or win the head-to-head matchup against in the Western Conference, which is absolutely bonkers. Because if you look at the full standings, what are the Wolves? 1-1 against the Pistons, 0-2 against the Hornets, I think 0-2 against the Pacers, 1-1 against the Magic. Like, the Wolves struggled with the end of the bottom of the Eastern Conference, and they struggled a little with the bottom of the Western Conference, but they've won basically all the tiebreakers. Their conference record currently is 27-23. It's better than the Lakers. It's better than the Clippers conference record. It's equal with with a half game of the Warriors. It's better than the same as the Mavs, better than the Thunder. But anyway, this tiebreaker in a 5-way tie would be the record against the other 5 teams, win percentage in games played among the tied teams. And the Wolves at 11-6, if they beat New Orleans, would get the 5 seed in this scenario, which is just incredible. There are so many scenarios on the table here, but again, the most likely scenario is the Wolves are a 9 or 10. I'm sitting here right now. I think the very most likely scenario is they stay in 9th. They do have the tiebreaker over Oklahoma City if they finish tied, so they would get the 9 and host that game against OKC. But there's still an outside shot at 5, 6, 7, or 8, and there's still an slightly further outside shot if the Wolves lose out and the Mavs get hot that the Wolves could miss altogether. So needless to say, Tuesday night in Brooklyn's an important game, which is a perfect segue to previewing the Wolves-Nets game on Tuesday night. We're going to do that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at BetterHelp. The show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Getting to know yourself can be a lifelong process, especially because we're always growing and changing. Therapy is all about deepening your self-awareness and understanding, because sometimes we don't know what we want or why we react the way we do until we talk through things. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who can take you on that journey of self-discovery from wherever you are. In general, therapy, I like just talking to somebody about whatever is going on in your life can be so helpful. Even if you don't think so, or you're worried about the stigma attached to it, don't be. It can be extremely, extremely helpful and really, frankly, be life-changing. That's not an exaggeration. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Discover your potential with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. All right, Wolves Nets on Tuesday night, and both teams have something to play for. The Nets are alone in 6th in the Eastern Conference, and actually a win would basically cement their spot there. They're 2 games up on Miami. They're a game and a half back of the Knicks, who have clinched a playoff spot. It's pretty unlikely they're going to catch, 2.5 back of the Knicks. They're not going to catch New York for number 5. So if the Nets, by winning, virtually lock themselves into 6, I believe, and so it's important for them. It's more important for Minnesota, because the Wolves have lost 3 straight. Everything we just talked about, they're only a game up on OKC. They're a game and a half behind the Pels for 8th. This is super, super important. And the Wolves and Nets just faced each other less than a month ago. It was about 3 weeks ago. And in that game, remember, this one went to overtime. It was a game the Wolves should have won. They led late. They had a big the Wolves actually led at halftime by 8. And then gave it all back and then some in the third quarter. Had a big fourth quarter, surged ahead late, but instead it went to overtime, and the Wolves ended up losing by a single point to the Nets. And remember, this was after the trade deadlines. This is after the All-Star break. The new look Nets team, Mikal Bridges, had 34 points on 24 shots in this one. Spencer Dinwiddie with 29 and 11. They got 12 off the bench from Royce O'Neal and 15 rebounds from O'Neal. The Wolves got a solid game from Anthony Edwards. A good Rudy Gobert game, 26 and 13, and another all-around impressive game from Kyle Anderson, 15, 11, and 7. 10 off the bench from Nickeil Alexander-Walker, although he didn't shoot it that well. And this was just kind of like the Wolves did a good job generally themselves offensively, especially getting to the line. This was kind of in the middle of that stretch when the Wolves got to the line a bunch, but just did not make their free throws. The Wolves got there 29 times in this game, but shot only 62%. They also were only 30% outside the arc. But because they played at such a fast pace, they did well in transition. Brooklyn, though, shot 47% on threes in this game. And for the season, now, again, the Nets underwent such big roster changes midseason. But for the season, the Nets are 5th in three-point percentage. They're 11th in three-point rate. They're 5th in percentage. They shoot a bunch of threes. And yes, Kevin Durant is mixed in there, and Kyrie's mixed in there. I get that. But each of those guys was only about 37.5% from three anyway in a Nets uniform. And as a team, this team is shooting 38%. Like, they've gotten a lot from, like Bridges, since he's been in Nets uniform, is just a shade under 42%. Joe Harris, of course, 42% on the season. Seth Curry, 40%. Like, this team throughout the season has featured a bunch of guys who could shoot the basketball. And that was a problem against the Wolves last time around. That's something to keep an eye on in this game. The Wolves and Nets were within a rebound of each other. I think the Nets were a +1. The Wolves were a -1 on the glass last time they faced each other. The Nets aren't a good rebounding team, though. So there was really no excuse for the Wolves to have that, but to let Royce O'Neal get 15 rebounds is just insane. The Nets are one of the few worst rebounding teams in the Wolves. Brooklyn's 29th in offensive rebounding and 28th in defensive rebounding. The Wolves, again, are 27th in offensive and 26th in defensive. So you're talking to two of the very worst rebounding teams on both ends of the floor in the entire league, but the Wolves are better than the Nets. And again, the Wolves have actually rebounded the ball fairly well of late. So that's going to be really important in this one too. You need a Karl-Anthony Towns bounce back. And frankly, he should have success against this Nets front line. I mean, like Nick Claxton, he's a good defender, fine. But there's really no reason that the Wolves should not have success in the paint between Gobert and Towns. Like, that to me is an area the Wolves should have a massive advantage. Walker Kessler, though, against them just the other night struggled. Like, Kessler, who's, tried to make a late surge for Rookie of the Year, he only played 22 minutes against the Nets, had 6 and 8 the other night. But again, like Claxton, Daron Sharp, like they're rotational bigs. Royce O'Neal's a good player, but again, 15 rebounds last time against the Wolves. Dorian Finney-Smith is a good defender, but like he shouldn't be beating you up on the glass or stopping you in the paint. Gobert and Towns have to have big games, and especially without Naz Reid. I don't think you can really play Luka Garza. Like, the Nets are going to play fast enough. You don't really want to deal with Garza playing in this game. I don't think Nate Knight's probably going to play much. I think you just need Cat and Rudy to stay out of foul trouble and play well, which frankly may be too much to ask for what we've seen lately, but that's going to be really important. Also, to some level, locking up Mikal Bridges, who's been on a tear lately for the Nets, that's going to be really key in this game. And not even just, I don't know that you could expect to lock him up, but at least make his life difficult. At least key in on him the way that teams key in on Anthony Edwards, because I wouldn't be super worried about much of the rest of this team offensively. Like, Bridges is the guy you got to look out for. Spencer Dinwiddie, you put Mike Conley on him, you do your best. He's going to get, probably like a 12 and 9 double-double, or that's not a double-double, a 12 and 9 or a 14 and 10 double-double or something like that. But you got to slow down Bridges as best you can. Make somebody else beat you if you're the Wolves. I think that's really, really important in this game. So for me, it's win the points of the paint battle, win the rebounding battle, make Bridges' life difficult, and then obviously taking care of the basketball. Like, that's been such a big issue for Minnesota. We talked all about it in the first segment here today. They're 28th in the league in turnover percentage. The Nets don't really turn teams over. They're 20th in defensive turnover rate. So they only turn teams over at a 12% rate. The Wolves are turning it over themselves at about a 14% rate this season. Minnesota has to avoid those sloppy turnovers. If they can do that, if they can battle in the paint, it's a very winnable game. Granted, on the road, and, first game of this weird, road trip with 3 days off in between, they have to win this game. You cannot fall two below 500 going into the weekend, or else things are going to get real ugly in a hurry. This would be a 4th consecutive loss. And for the Nets part, the Nets have just been winning. Like, they've been really streaky, but they've now won 3 consecutive and 4 out of 5. Before that, they'd lost 5 straight. They've beaten the Jazz, they've beaten the Hawks, they've beaten the Rockets. So not exactly a murderer's row of opponents. They beat the Heat by 29 a couple games before that. But they're still fighting to clinch this playoff berth. This is not going to be an easy game for Minnesota, and it's hard to find a more important game, quite frankly. All right, we will have the live postcast. We didn't have one over the weekend, but we'll do Wolves Nets postcast after the game. It's a 6:30 Central tip, So, ballparking it, we'll probably go live at about 9:45-ish or so Central Time. Marnie Gellner from Valley Sports North and myself over at the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube channel. So be sure to subscribe to be notified when we go live. And then we'll also do the post-game pod that'll post early on Wednesday. So be sure to follow and subscribe to this show. A big thank you for those that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Now make your second listen the Game to Game NBA podcast every moment, every top performance, and every result. Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.